Lovely to see you here. And if you're visiting, if you've come and you thought you were coming for an ordination and you're not going to get an ordination tonight, it's great that you're here. Thank you for coming and staying. It's great to see you. Karen Salmon is here. Can we just say hi to Karen? And I would love to be able to say that Karen came because she knows the worship at Willowfield can be powerful, and even the preaching's powerful. But Karen, why did you come this evening? So if you come for an ordination, so did Karen, so don't worry about that. You will see a Bible reading, or a couple of Bible readings coming up on the screen. You can find Bibles in the seat in front of you. If you've got your phone with you or your tablet, you might want to turn up. We're going to have two readings. One's one verse, but before we get to that, we're going to turn to Mark 4, and we're going to read 35 to 41. This is so well known. This is the calming of the storm. And then we're going to hear a verse from 1 Corinthians 13. But here's Mark 4. Let's hear the word of the Lord. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. We had a service at 5 o'clock, and I read this passage. And you know what? I don't think I have ever noticed that before. And other boats were with them. I always had it in my mind. It was one boat with Jesus and his disciples. But it sounds as if there was a bit of a flotilla going on here. So it wasn't just Jesus and the disciples facing the storm. There were other boats as well. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he, Jesus, awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And he said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the waves, the sea, obey him?" And 1 Corinthians 13, verse 3, so now faith, hope, and love abide, these three. But the greatest of these is love. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I wonder, do you have a morning wake-up routine? How do you begin your day? Is it exactly the same every day? We have a member of our church. Her name is Sharon Louise, and Sharon Louise comes along to the 10 o'clock service, and she sits there. And every time I come into the service for 10 o'clock, Sharon Louise has the exact same question for me. And almost every Sunday since I've been here over the last 2 years, Sharon Louise has exactly the same question for me, and it's this: what did you have for breakfast? And I give her exactly the same answer that I've given her for the past two years. I've had granola, Sharon Louise, and she knows it, but she still asks me the same question. But, I am very simple in the morning. I have a routine, and particularly when I want for breakfast, I have either granola or I have Weetabix. That's all I basically have. Pretty boring. But I wonder, do you have a wake-up routine? There's an American business coach called Tony Robbins. You may have heard of him. Interesting sort of wake-up routine. So he gets up, and the first thing he does is he has a workout. Then he has a vitamin drink. Then he has lemon water. And then he journals for 15 minutes, and he writes down 3 things he wants to get done that day. And all of this that he does, he makes sure that he doesn't have his mobile phone with him. So that's his wake-up routine. Richard Branson, founder of Virgin Atlantic, says that he begins every day by saying thank you. Just before he gets up, he's still lying in bed. He spends a moment simply saying thank you for his family, for his wife, his health, and the many things that make up his life. There was an American author called Annie Dillard, and she said this, and I think this is a profound statement. She said, how we spend each day is how we will spend our lives. In other words, she's saying that your daily habits are actually going to be life-shaping habits. Writing to the church in Corinth, the Apostle Paul says these famous words. He says, "So now faith, hope, love, abide, remain." And those three words, faith, hope, and love, don't just appear in 1 Corinthians. They appear in 1 Thessalonians, they appear in Colossians, and then in other places in Paul's writing they appear, but maybe in a slightly different order: faith, hope, and love. And so Paul, I think, has these three things in mind. For Paul, these are like spiritual habits, spiritual ways of living, ways in which you react to life. So if something happens, the way that you react is summed up in those words: faith, hope, and love. So if life throws something at you, how do you respond? Well, you walk by faith, and you live out of hope, and you love for all you're worth. So these words, faith, hope, and love, were essential to Paul. They were like the three words that summed up what it meant to live the Christian life. You walked by faith, you lived out of hope, and you loved for all you're worth. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful summary of how to walk into Monday. I'm going to walk into Monday living by faith, living out of hope. I'm going to love for all I'm worth. And I want us to think about the first of those. That's where I want us to camp this evening. Walking by faith. That's the reading from Mark 4. Walking by faith. Yvonne and I decided that we were going to drive out to see our kids, and that meant this summer that we were going to take a ferry from Rosslare to Cherbourg, which is 18 hours long, 18 hours in a ferry. I have never been in a ferry for 18 hours in my life. And in fact, the last time I was on a ferry, it was 3 hours from Rosslare to Fishguard, and I have never, ever, ever been as sick as I was for those 3 hours. It was awful, absolutely awful. So I was quite nervous about taking 18 hours on a ferry. And the ferry out was just beautiful. It was like the Caribbean. You know, the sea was calm. Went to bed. You couldn't feel the ship moving. Woke up. Went out for a walk about 7 o'clock. Saw dolphins in the English Channel. It was wonderful. And then 2 weeks later, I began looking at my phone just to see what the weather forecast was going to be for our trip back. And they decided that on the day that we were traveling back, they would name the storm that was coming in from the Atlantic as Storm Anthony. And we sailed back through that storm. And I have to say, I knew about it 3 days beforehand, and I was probably pretty grumpy for those 3 days because I knew what was ahead. I don't know whether you've ever been in a storm on a ship or a boat, but I tell you what, this was interesting, I have to say. All I have to say, praise God for seasickness tablets. They were absolutely wonderful. But I tell you what, there were times it was interesting. You were sitting on the boat and the waves were coming up around you. And, the boat would go woof and the whole boat would shake. It was an interesting experience, character building. But here we have a storm, and it's not on the Irish Sea or in the English Channel. It's Lake Geneva, famous for its storms, famous for its windstorms. And these are the disciples. They're in the boat, and they're crossing the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus is exhausted, and he's asleep. He's asleep in the boat. And that's very interesting. It's a detail we need to bear in mind. Jesus is asleep in the boat, and a lake storm explodes from nowhere, and soon the disciples are bailing for all their work. And as experienced fishermen, they knew that they were in trouble. They knew they were in trouble. And panic rises with the waves, and in a last-ditch effort, they wake Jesus with these words: "Lord, don't you care if we drown? Don't you care, Lord?" Their confidence in God's care is sinking with the ship. And Jesus stands, and he speaks, and the wind dies. And I love the way Mark puts it, a great calm appeared. It didn't take hours for the lake to calm down. Jesus speaks, and it's an immediate calm. And he looks at his disciples and he says this, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" What does it mean to walk by faith? I want us to dig into the passage and answer that question. What does it mean to walk by faith? Here's the first thing that strikes me. Walking by faith begins with Jesus. Walking by faith begins with Jesus. Feel the power of Jesus' question. Do you still have no faith? Do you still have no faith? That must have really stung the disciples. Do you still have no faith? And it strongly suggests that Jesus has proven himself enough up until that point that they would have trusted him in the storm. Jesus has given them enough reasons to trust him. The disciples had enough evidence that Jesus could be trusted, even in the face of a life and death situation. New Testament faith is not some vague thing. New Testament faith is very specific. New Testament faith is faith in Jesus. That's what New Testament faith is. Faith in a person, faith in Jesus Christ, that Jesus is enough, that he can be trusted, that you can lean on him in the storm. And that for me means that if my faith is to grow, then that's going to grow through my relationship with Jesus Christ. That's why walking by faith begins with Jesus. If you were to turn back one page from Mark 4 to Mark chapter 3, you would find that moment in Mark's gospel where Jesus is calling his disciples. The disciples that would end up in that boat, Jesus is calling the disciples to come follow him. And Mark describes this moment like this. He says this, "And Jesus appointed 12 so that they might be with him and that he might send them out." There's discipleship. There's following Jesus in a nutshell. That they might be with him and that he might send them out. That they might be with him. Discipleship, following Jesus, is about being with Jesus. It's being with Jesus. It's about deepening our understanding, our knowledge, our experience of Jesus. It's abiding in him. It's remaining in him. It's being with Jesus. That's the place where faith, New Testament faith, grows. It grows in being with Jesus. And as our summer begins to come to an end and we move into autumn, I really want to call you and encourage you to be with Jesus. Be with him. Be with him. Stay close to him, remain in him, abide in him. But New Testament faith doesn't only grow when we're with Jesus. It also grows when we allow Jesus to send us out. And often that means being sent out into places that are beyond our comfort zones. The youth fellowship that I grew up in the church that I attended grew up in Lisburn, I had a really good youth fellowship, and it was a really active youth fellowship, and they were not behind the wall in pushing you beyond your comfort zones. So has anybody ever done an open air? Anybody had any experience of doing open airs? Well, that was what our youth fellowship did. We used to go down to Bow Street in Lisburn, and we would do open airs on Saturday morning and afternoon. And I remember there for the very first time thinking, all my friends from school are going to see me. I can't say I was at peace with that thought. And then I remember the time when they said, "Okay, Clive, you're going to give your testimony in Bow Street." And what? And then I remember the first time I said, Clive, it's your turn to preach this week. Jesus sends us out, and in the sending out, he sends us out into places which often pushes beyond our comfort zone, pushes beyond our personal resources, into a place of dependence where we are utterly dependent upon him. And it's in those moments that we encounter the reality of the living, present God. And as I was thinking about this, I found myself, I couldn't get beyond this for a while. And perhaps I think maybe one of the things that the Lord wants to say to some of us this evening is don't lose that. Don't lose that willingness to be sent out by Jesus. Because in the sending out, that is where faith grows. That's where your faith in Jesus and your encounter with Jesus grows. So don't lose that willingness. Don't lose that flexibility. That sensitivity of hearing Jesus sending you out to places beyond your comfort zone. And I want to, if I may, speak to people of my age. So if you're sort of 50 plus, I think this is a word for you tonight, is that do not lose that desire, that willingness to hear the Lord sending you out. To allowing the Lord to say, Clive, I want you to go there. Whatever there might be. I want you to take on a new area of service. I want you to get ordained. I want you to be licensed as a parish evangelist or a diocesan evangelist. I want you to become a Sunday school teacher. And that sending out will be costly. There'll be some hard decisions. You'll need to give up something in order to do it. But I really want to say that to you tonight. Don't lose that willingness to say yes to Jesus sending you out, because he will. That's what it's like to follow Jesus. You're with him and he sends you out. So walking by faith begins with Jesus. It's all about relationship with Jesus and being sent out by Jesus. Walking by faith continues when we understand that life is full of battles and blessing. That life is full of battles and blessing. Many of you I know would use the Bible in 1 year app. Many of you use that. I love that. I love Nicky Gumbel's commentaries. And here's something that he said in a bit. I'm not even sure it was about this passage, but he said this, and it really struck me. He said this: I've never forgotten a talk I heard over 30 years ago. The speaker started by saying that the Christian life is battle and blessing. 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 The Christian life is full of battle and blessing. And Nicky Gumbel goes on to say this: at the time I thought, why is he going on like this? Will he never end? But he said he was making a memorable and a profound point. The Christian life involves battles and blessings. Rick Warren says that he used to think that the Christian life was a succession of battles and blessings. So you'd have a battle, and then you'd have a season of blessing. Then you would have a season of battle. Then you would have a season of blessing. But he goes on to say that he soon learned that actually the Christian life is often both of those things together. You have battle and blessing at the same time. And Rick Warren gave the example of the time in his life when he published his book, The Purpose-Driven Life. It became the fastest-selling Christian book of all time. It gave him enormous publicity and influence. And yet, at the very same time, his wife, Kay, was diagnosed with cancer. And he had both of these things in his life: battle and blessing. And walking by faith means living in that that moment, that tension, that life can be a time of battle and a time of blessing. That you can have both. And the very fact that Mark records this story for us, that the disciples are in this moment where they're literally, it's a life and death moment where they're following Jesus and it's a battle. And it's very interesting that at the end of this story, we go into another story where Jesus delivers the demoniac. Do you remember the demons going into the pigs? Do you remember that story? That follows it. And there's a real sense that this storm is more than just simply a natural storm. It's actually an attack. And maybe the reason that Mark is recording this for us, and that's in his gospel, is to remind us that if the disciples follow Jesus and they experience that, so will we. That will be reality. That the Christian life is a life of battle and blessing. A battle and blessing. And people who walk by faith understand that. And people who walk by faith are willing, and I say in inverted commas, willing to take the battles as well as the blessing. And some of the most godly men and women that I have known are often the men and women who walk with a limp in life, who have known the attack, who have known the battle. But because they've known the battle, because they've known the attack, have also encountered Jesus in that. And although these people might walk with a limp, might carry the wounds of the battle, yet they are the people who probably know Jesus better than most of us because they've met him in that moment. And so people who walk by faith accept that the battles will come with the blessing. That we're not going to turn away, walk away, that we are going to resist, that we will take our stand, that we will persevere, and that we will trust that Jesus is enough. Walking by faith. Last thought, and then we're going to finish up. So walking by faith begins with Jesus, relationship with Jesus, remaining in Jesus, being sent out by Jesus. Walking by faith includes the battles and the blessing. And walking by faith, finally, at least that's the final thing I want to say tonight, means having this deep inner confidence, this knowing that Jesus actually is in the boat. He's with you in the storm. And sometimes, and you will know this, and I find it interesting that Mark deliberately makes this point, that when we go through the storm, it feels like he's asleep. Isn't it interesting that that's recorded for us? I mean, if it's not really great for Jesus, is it? You know, there his disciples are panicking and they think they're dying, and he's fast asleep. But I wonder whether Mark adds that because often that's how it feels. It feels that Jesus is asleep. That he's unaware of what's going on. That we're on our own. That we've got to solve it ourselves. And yet that's not the case. That's not the case. Jesus stands and speaks, and immediately, everything changes. He's in the boat. He's in the boat. As the disciples cry out to him for help, he's present, intervening miraculously. We need to hear that tonight. We have a Lord and a God who intervenes miraculously. Some of us need to hear that this evening, that the kingdom of God can come in an instant, in a moment, powerfully, almost terrifyingly. The kingdom of God can come in the now as Jesus speaks and moves. And he wants us to be a people who walk by faith, trusting that he will move in his time and in his way. He's in the boat. My morning routine involves, in some shape or form, a time of devotion. That's so good for me because it centers me in Jesus. It centers me in him for the day. This devotional time, in some shape or form, will remind me who God is and who I am in him. And as I enter the day, I feel centered. And then I open my email. And suddenly that centeredness and that sense of, yes, Jesus, I'm in your presence, suddenly disappears as I start to read my email and I start to write down the 75 things I've got to do by Friday. And suddenly it all disappears and I feel as if I'm on my own. And I've got to do it by myself, and I feel under pressure, and I can sense the anxiety rising and the despair, and I've got to pause and just push back into being centered in Jesus again. Pete Gregg, who heads up 24/7 prayer, talks about this and how it's so easy it is to walk through the day and not be centered in Jesus and not walk by faith because you've forgotten that Jesus even exists as you go about your day. And so one of the things that he intentionally does, and some of the things that he's trained himself to do, is that he deliberately invites Jesus into the normal stuff. So the example he gives is sitting down and watching TV. Lord, would you sit down and watch TV with me? And that sounds really silly, doesn't it? Until you realize that actually what he's doing is that he's training himself, reminding himself that Jesus is always there, always in the boat. Lord, would you come to Tesco's with me? Would you be with me when I'm walking the dog? Lord, would you be with me when I'm doing my email? You know, whatever normal looks like to you, the habit of inviting Jesus into that moment is reinforcing the truth that Jesus is always, always, always in the boat. There was a Advent Sunday. That makes sense to you. Advent Sunday before Christmas. Here in Willowfield, we have an Advent wreath, and you have 4 candles, and for the 4 Sundays of Advent, you have a big candle in the middle that represents Christmas Day. It didn't happen here, but it happened back in our last church, where there was one particular Sunday where we had somebody come up and strike a match and try to light the candle, and for some reason we could not get that candle lit. And finally we got it lit, but you know what? It was the most pathetic flame you could ever have imagined. It felt so weak. It was a feeble light. And it was a particular time when we as a church were going through a challenging time, a real challenging time. And for many of us, our faith was reflected in that really, really feeble candlelight. And in a sense, that morning, as we saw that flame trying to burn as brightly as it possibly could, the Lord began to speak to us as a church. That's how we might feel like right now, that we might feel weak and pushed back and on the defensive and even retreating, and our faith might feel like that pathetic little flame. But we were to know, we were never to forget that the Lord of the church, the Good Shepherd, had not walked out, that he was there. Could I invite the band to come up and join me? We're going to worship together with a couple more songs. Later on, the prayer ministry team will be joining us. But for those of us this evening who feel that the flame of faith is so weak, and could even be snuffed out, I would love to encourage you this evening to come out of your chair and to come and have some of these people pray with you, and to allow yourself to be reminded that Jesus hasn't left the building, that he is with you, and that you can walk by faith because he is in the boat, and that you can walk into Monday morning with a quiet confidence because he's going nowhere, that he is with you. Can we stand? I'll pray for us and then we're going to worship.